Welcome back. How much does it cost to keep the peace? For Margaret, the price was $18,000. A credit card maxed out by a son she adored, and a daughter-in-law who saw her as furniture. We're often told that being a good mother means endless sacrifice, but what happens when there's nothing left to give? After years of being a soft place to land for people who never asked how she was doing, Margaret decided to say one simple, devastating word: no. This isn't just a story about money, it's a story about the high cost of silence and the power of finally standing your ground. Stay until the end for a revelation that changed Margaret's life forever. If you find value in this story, please like and subscribe.
There is a particular kind of loneliness that nobody warns you about. Not the loneliness of being alone. I had known that kind for years, ever since Robert passed and the house went quiet in a way that never fully recovered. That loneliness, as painful as it was, had a shape to it. You could name it. You could sit with it on the porch in the evenings and almost make peace with it. No, the loneliness I'm talking about is different. It's the loneliness of sitting at a dinner table surrounded by people who are supposed to love you, and realizing somewhere between the salad and the main course that not one of them has asked you a single question about your life. Not because they're cruel, not because they don't care, but because somewhere along the way, you stopped being a person to them and became something else entirely. A resource, a convenience, a soft place to land when things got hard. I didn't notice it happening. That's the part that still takes my breath away when I think about it. I was a nurse for 28 years. I was trained to notice things, the subtle shift in a patient's breathing, the slight tremor in someone's hands, the particular way a person's eyes go distant right before they stop fighting. I was good at seeing what others missed, but I missed this completely. My name is Margaret. I'm 66 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon, in a small house with a garden that gets too much rain and not enough sun, and I love it anyway. I raised my son Daniel alone after his father died, worked double shifts so he could have everything he needed, and told myself every year that the sacrifices were worth it because he was turning into a good man. For a long time, I believed that. Then one Tuesday morning, I sat in my car outside a bank on Morrison Street with my hands resting in my lap, the engine off, and I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I almost didn't recognize it. Quiet, inside my own chest, for the first time in 7 years. I hadn't told Daniel I was there. I hadn't told anyone. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt exactly right. Let me tell you how it started. The garden was Robert's idea, originally. He had sketched it out on a paper napkin one Sunday morning in 1989, our second year in the house on Elm Creek Drive, while I was still in my robe drinking coffee, and he was already 3 cups in and full of plans. A raised bed here, tomatoes along the south fence, maybe lavender if you're feeling ambitious. He drew arrows and little squares and labeled everything in his careful architectural handwriting, and I had laughed at him because we both knew he would never actually build it. He didn't. I did. The summer after he died, when Daniel was 14 and the silence in the house had become something physical, something you had to move around, like furniture. I went to the hardware store on a Saturday morning and bought lumber and soil and seeds and spent 3 weekends building exactly what Robert had drawn on that napkin. I still have the napkin. It's in the kitchen drawer, folded into quarters, the ink faded but legible. That garden became its first thing that was entirely mine. Over the years, it grew into something I was quietly proud of. Tomatoes in June, the kind that split open if you left them on the vine a day too long, too ripe, too full of themselves. Lavender along the south fence, just like Robert had drawn. Sweet peas in the spring that climbed the trellis and smelled like something from a dream you can't quite hold on to after waking. In October, when everything else had given up, the rosemary was still going, stubborn and fragrant and somehow more alive in the cold. Every morning before anything else, I would make coffee the way my mother had taught me. 2 heaping spoons, a small pinch of salt, no sugar, and carry it outside in the blue ceramic mug Daniel had given me one Mother's Day when he was 9. I would sit on the back step and drink it slowly while the garden did what gardens do in the early morning. Exhaled. 15 minutes, sometimes 20. Before the phone, before the news, before the weight of the day settled onto my shoulders. That was mine. That small, quiet ritual was entirely mine. Inside the house, in the corner of the living room where the afternoon light came in at an angle that made everything look slightly golden, I had a chair, a wingback, upholstered in a deep green fabric that had faded slightly over the years to something softer and more interesting than its original color. I had found it at an estate sale in 1997 and paid $40 for it and carried it to the car myself because the man running the sale didn't offer to help and I didn't ask. That chair was where I read. Every evening, after dinner, after the dishes, I would sit in that chair with whatever book I was in the middle of and read until my eyes got heavy. I was never a fast reader. I had never seen the point. I liked to stay in a sentence for a while, turn it over, see what was underneath it. I liked books that trusted you to keep up. On the side table next to the chair, a lamp, a coaster, and whatever I happened to be reading. For years, that small stack of books was the most accurate map of my inner life that existed anywhere. I should tell you about Elaine. We met in 1993 at Providence Hospital, where I was working the overnight shift in the cardiac unit, and she had just started as a patient intake coordinator. She had brought homemade banana bread to the break room on her first day, a full loaf, wrapped in foil, with a handwritten note that said, "Help yourself, I stress bake." And I had known immediately that we would be friends for a long time. 30 years later, we still had coffee every other Thursday at a place called Groundwork on Division Street that neither of us particularly loved, but both of us kept suggesting out of habit. She had retired 2 years before from teaching 4th grade, a career change she had made in her 40s that had suited her completely. And she lived 12 minutes from me in a house full of plants and strong opinions and a cat named Gerald, who regarded all human visitors with open suspicion. Elaine was the kind of friend who told you the truth before you asked for it and waited patiently while you caught up. Over the years, she had been right about more things than I cared to admit. I had learned to listen to her even when, especially when, what she was saying made me uncomfortable. She was the only person in all the years that followed who kept seeing me clearly. I didn't understand how much that mattered until I nearly lost it. And then there was Daniel, my son, my only child. The person I had reorganized my entire life around for 27 years without ever once thinking of it as a sacrifice. He was, and I say this as someone who knew him more completely than anyone, a genuinely good person. Not perfect. He had Robert's habit of going quiet when things got hard, of retreating inward rather than talking, of letting problems accumulate until they became impossible to ignore. He was occasionally careless with time and money in the way that people who have always been caught are sometimes careless. But underneath those things, there was a fundamental decency in him that I had watched develop slowly over decades, and that I trusted completely. He called me every Sunday. Not always long calls, sometimes just 10 minutes while he was driving somewhere, but consistent, without fail, for years. He remembered to ask about my patients by name when I was still working. After I retired, he remembered to ask about my garden, my books, the Thursday coffees with Elaine. When the gutters on my house pulled away from the fascia board in a storm, he drove over on a Saturday with his tools and fixed them without being asked and without accepting the money I tried to give him afterward. "Mom, put that away," he had said, waving off the bills. "I'm not a contractor. I'm your son." I had thought, watching him climb down the ladder that afternoon with leaves in his hair, that I had done something right, that the years of double shifts and careful budgeting and doing everything alone had added up to something, that he was proof. I held on to that thought for a long time. He met Vivian in the autumn of 2017 at a conference in Seattle for something related to digital marketing. He called me the following Sunday and mentioned her carefully, the way he had always introduced new things he wasn't sure I'd receive well, with a kind of studied neutrality that I had learned over the years meant the opposite. "She's interesting," he said. "She has a lot of energy." "What does she do?" I asked. "She's building a wellness brand. Online mostly. She's really good at it." I asked what that meant, building a wellness brand. He explained somewhat vaguely that it involved social media and content and products. I asked what kind of products. He said supplements mostly, lifestyle things. I said that sounded interesting, which was what I said when I didn't know what else to say. "You'll like her," he said, and I could hear him wanting that to be true. 3 months later, he brought her to Portland for a weekend. She arrived with a bottle of Burgundy wine and a smile that seemed to have been specifically calibrated to put people at ease, wide and warm and deployed at exactly the right moments. She was 34, 11 years younger than Daniel, with the kind of effortless beauty that people who have it rarely seem to notice, and people who don't can never stop noticing. She hugged me when she arrived as though we had known each other for years. "I've heard so much about you," she said, pulling back and holding me at arm's length the way people do when they want to look at you. "Daniel says you're the strongest woman he knows. I can see why." I believed her. Standing in my own doorway on a November afternoon with the smell of the pot roast I'd been cooking since noon moving through the house, I believed every word of it. I was charmed and I was glad, and I thought, this is going to be fine. She toured the house with the easy confidence of someone who tours houses often, picking things up, setting them down, asking questions that sounded like compliments. When we went out to the garden, she stood at the edge of the dead November beds and looked around with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Oh, wow," she said finally. "This is so quaint." She moved on immediately, back inside, back to the warmth and the wine. Daniel followed her. I stood in the garden alone for a moment longer than necessary. It was probably nothing, I told myself. I went inside and finished making dinner. The wedding was in Napa Valley. Vivian had wanted it there from the beginning. She had mentioned it, Margaret would later recall, within the first 20 minutes of that November dinner, before the pot roast had even been served. "I've always imagined getting married somewhere with mountains or vineyards," she had said, swirling her wine with the authority of someone who had thought about this for a long time. "Somewhere that photographs beautifully." Daniel had looked at Margaret across the table with an expression she recognized, the one that said he had already agreed to something and was hoping she would catch up without needing to be asked directly. She caught up. When Daniel called 3 weeks later to say they were engaged, Margaret said all the right things in the right order. "I'm so happy for you. She's wonderful. Of course I'll help however I can." Then she sat down in the green chair with her coffee and did some arithmetic on the back of an envelope. The number she arrived at was $15,000. She transferred it the following Monday without being asked twice. She told herself, "He's my son. This is what you do." The wedding itself was beautiful in the way that very expensive things are sometimes beautiful, so thoroughly considered, so relentlessly curated, that it left no room for anything accidental or unplanned. 312 guests. A vineyard ceremony at golden hour that looked in every photograph exactly like a photograph. A reception in a restored barn strung with Edison bulbs and filled with the kind of floral arrangements that Margaret recognized from the pages of magazines she sometimes flipped through in waiting rooms. She sat at table 11. She had not been consulted about the seating. She had assumed, without examining the assumption, that she would be somewhere near the front. Not at the head table. She wasn't unreasonable, but nearby. Close enough to be visible. Close enough to be, in some spatial sense, acknowledged. Table 11 was near the back, adjacent to the bar, next to a woman named Patricia, who was Vivian's father's second wife's sister, and who spent the entire evening explaining in considerable detail the real estate market in Scottsdale, Arizona. Patricia had opinions about square footage and HOA fees, and the specific advantages of certain zip codes that she conveyed with the urgency of someone delivering important medical news. Margaret listened and nodded and refilled her wineglass twice. At some point during the speeches, Daniel caught her eye from across the room and smiled. She smiled back. She meant it. He looked happy, genuinely, unguardedly happy, in a way she hadn't seen since he was a boy, since the years before Robert died and the world went complicated. Whatever else was true, that was true. She held on to that. The album arrived 3 months later, a large, beautifully bound thing that Vivian had clearly spent considerable thought and money on. Margaret sat at the kitchen table and went through it slowly, page by page. There were photographs of Vivian arriving. Vivian with her bridesmaids. Vivian with her parents. Vivian and Daniel at the altar. Vivian and Daniel on the vineyard steps. Vivian and Daniel in the last golden light of the evening. There was a photograph of the floral centerpieces. There was a full page dedicated to the cake. There was not a single photograph of Daniel and Margaret together. Not one. She went through the album twice to be certain. Then she closed it carefully and set it on the table and sat with the feeling for a while, the way you sit with a bruise, pressing on it lightly, testing its edges, not quite ready to name what had happened. She called Daniel that evening. She tried to keep her voice easy and light. "The album is beautiful," she said. "I noticed there aren't any photos of the two of us. I was wondering if maybe we could do a little reshoot sometime. Nothing formal, just something for me to have." "Oh, Mom." She could hear him wince slightly. The photographer was so overwhelmed. There were so many people. "But yes, absolutely. We'll do a reshoot. I'll talk to Vivian about it. That would be lovely, Margaret said. Whenever works. She wrote it on the calendar anyway, left a blank space under the month of April with a small question mark. April came and went. The question mark stayed. She took it off the calendar in May and told herself it didn't matter. She almost believed it. Year 2, 2019, the year of small adjustments. The adjustments came so gradually that Margaret didn't register them as a pattern for a long time. They arrived one at a time, each one reasonable in isolation, each one requiring only a small recalibration. Daniel and Vivian had begun coming for Sunday dinners once or twice a month, which Margaret loved, genuinely loved, the house feeling full in a way it hadn't in years. But slowly, without any formal negotiation, the menu began to change. Vivian didn't eat gluten. Margaret learned this on a Sunday in January when she had made lasagna, Robert's mother's recipe, the one she had been making for 40 years, and watched Vivian move it carefully to the side of her plate with the practiced diplomacy of someone who had done this many times before. "I'm so sorry," Vivian said. "I should have mentioned. I don't do well with gluten. But everything else looks amazing." Margaret said it was no trouble at all. The following Sunday, she made roast chicken with roasted vegetables. Naturally gluten-free, she had checked. Vivian had seconds. Daniel looked pleased. Then there was the dairy, then the refined sugar, then a period of several months during which Vivian was doing an elimination protocol that Margaret never fully understood but tried to accommodate anyway, consulting websites in the evenings and making shopping lists that were longer and more complicated than they used to be. She told herself she was being considerate. She told herself this was what you did when family came to dinner. You took care of them. You paid attention to what they needed. You adjusted. She stopped making the apple pie. Not because anyone asked her to, simply because there was never a right time for it anymore. Never a Sunday when the dietary landscape was uncomplicated enough for a dessert made with butter and white flour and brown sugar. The recipe card, her grandmother's handwriting on an index card gone soft with age, stayed in the tin box in the kitchen drawer. She didn't notice she had stopped making it until much later. Year 3, 2020, the year she became a guest. The pandemic arrived in March and rearranged everything. Daniel and Vivian's lease was up in April, their new place not available until September, and it made sense. It genuinely made sense. Margaret could see that clearly, for them to stay with her for the interim. She had the space. She was retired. She wanted to help. They moved in on a Friday with more boxes than Margaret had expected, and a particular energy that she recognized from her years in hospitals, the energy of people who were accustomed to having their needs centered and were not entirely conscious of this. Within 2 weeks, the living room had been rearranged. Vivian worked from home, which meant, in practice, that she worked from whatever room had the best light and the quietest background. The living room, as it turned out, had both. The green wingback chair was moved, not thrown out, just relocated, nudged toward the corner, and then, one afternoon while Margaret was at the pharmacy, moved into the hallway, and then, sometime in the weeks that followed, into the storage room off the kitchen. Margaret noticed its absence the way you notice a tooth that has been pulled. Not constantly, but whenever you reach for it with your tongue and find only space. She didn't say anything. The storage room was accessible. She could sit in it any time she wanted. It was just a chair. One afternoon in July, Vivian was filming a segment for her Instagram, something about morning routines and intention setting from what Margaret could gather. And she appeared in the kitchen doorway while Margaret was making lunch, her phone on a small tripod on the coffee table, a ring light casting everything in an even, shadowless glow. "Dorothy, would you mind staying upstairs for maybe an hour? I'm recording and the kitchen sounds carry." Margaret looked at the sandwich she had been halfway through making. "Of course," she said. "No trouble at all." She carried her lunch upstairs on a plate and sat on the edge of her bed and ate it there, listening to the muffled sound of Vivian's voice rising and falling in the practiced cadences of someone performing ease for an audience. She finished her sandwich. She looked around the bedroom. Her bedroom, the room she had slept in for 31 years, the room where Robert had died, and where she had lain awake for 100 nights afterward, learning to exist in the new silence. She thought, I am eating lunch on my bed in my own house because I was asked to stay upstairs. She thought, when did this become normal? She didn't have an answer. That was the part that frightened her. It was Elaine who said it first. In August, one of the rare Thursdays they had managed to keep their coffee date, Margaret had been explaining why she couldn't stay long. that she needed to get back because Vivian had a call scheduled in the afternoon and liked the house quiet. Elaine had set down her coffee cup with a deliberateness that Margaret recognized as meaning something. "Maggie," she said, "since when do you manage your schedule around your daughter-in-law's work calls? She just needs quiet for the background. It's not a big deal. In your own house? Elaine, I'm not criticizing you." Elaine's voice was careful, the way it got when she was saying something important. "I'm just asking. Since when?" Margaret didn't have an answer for that either. She changed the subject. She talked about the garden, about the tomatoes that were finally coming in, about a book she had started and wasn't sure about yet. Elaine let her change the subject, which was its own kind of answer. But driving home that afternoon, Margaret found herself thinking about the question in a way she couldn't quite turn off. Since when? She didn't know. That was the honest answer. She genuinely did not know when it had started. The adjusting, the accommodating, the making herself smaller in increments so small that no single one had seemed worth mentioning. She pulled into her driveway and sat in the car for a moment before going inside. Through the kitchen window, she could see the light was on. She could see Vivian moving around inside, her house, her kitchen, her light, and she felt something she didn't have a clean name for yet. Not anger, not quite. Something quieter than anger. Something that had been building for long enough that it no longer had sharp edges. She went inside and started making dinner. Year 5, 2022, the year of reasonable requests. Daniel called on a Thursday in March. Margaret was in the garden when the phone rang. Early spring, the soil still cold and resistant, the sweet peas just beginning to push through. She had been on her knees for an hour, working compost into the bed along the south fence, and her hands were dark with dirt when she pulled off her glove to answer. "Hey, Mom, you got a minute?" She sat back on her heels. "Of course. So this is a little awkward." He laughed, the way he did when he wanted her to know in advance that whatever came next should be received gently. "Vivian's car needs new tires. All 4. The mechanic says they're basically unsafe to drive on, and we're a little stretched right now with the mortgage refinance going through. I was wondering if you could maybe lend us $800, just until things settle. $800. Tires, her daughter-in-law's safety." "Of course," Margaret said. "I'll transfer it today." "You're the best, Mom. Seriously." She hung up and stayed on her knees in the garden for another moment, looking at the sweet pea shoots coming up through the soil, small and pale and new. She thought about how tender things were in their early stages, how much they needed before they could hold themselves up. She transferred the money when she went inside. July brought another call. They were short on this mortgage payment. Just temporarily, Daniel said. The refinance had taken longer than expected, and there was a gap of about $2,000 that needed to be covered to avoid a late penalty. He would pay her back as soon as the refinance cleared. 2 weeks at most. Margaret transferred the $2,000. In October, he called again. Vivian had been invited to present at a wellness conference in Sedona. A real opportunity, Daniel said. The kind of exposure that could genuinely grow her brand. The registration and travel and accommodation came to $3,500. It was an investment, really, in their future, in her business. Margaret sat at the kitchen table with the phone against her ear and looked out at the October garden. The rosemary still going, stubborn and fragrant, everything else having given up for the year. "I'll transfer it tomorrow," she said. "Mom, you have no idea how much this means." She thought she probably did. She just didn't say so. She didn't keep a running total. She told herself this was because she trusted him, which was true. But there was another reason she didn't examine too carefully. She suspected that if she added it up, the number would require her to feel something she wasn't ready to feel yet. By December, she had given or lent, the distinction had grown blurry, just over $18,000 that year. None of it had come back. She bought herself a small notebook at the drugstore in January and wrote the amounts down, not in accusation, just in record. Tires, August mortgage, Sedona conference. The numbers sat on the page looking patient and factual and entirely without drama. She put the notebook in the kitchen drawer next to Robert's napkin and the recipe tin and tried not to think about it. Year 6, 2023, the year of the credit card. It was Daniel's idea, presented over Sunday dinner in February with the careful casualness that Margaret had come to recognize as meaning it was not casual at all. "Mom, I wanted to ask you something. My credit score took a hit during the refinance. It's nothing serious. It'll recover. But right now I'm having trouble getting approved for a card with a decent limit. I was wondering if I could be added to one of yours, just as an authorized user, just for emergencies. Vivian was at the counter refilling her water glass, her back to the room. She didn't turn around. What kind of emergencies? Margaret asked. Just life stuff, car things. If something comes up and I need to move fast, I'd pay it off every month. Margaret looked at her son across the dinner table. He was 40 years old, and his hair had started going gray at the temples in a way that reminded her painfully of Robert. He was looking at her with an expression that was equal parts hope and embarrassment, the same expression he had worn at 14 when he needed lunch money and hated having to ask. All right, she said. I'll call them tomorrow. She added him the following day. She checked the statement the first month. A gas purchase, a grocery run, $62 at a hardware store. Responsible, she thought. Exactly what he'd said. She stopped checking as carefully after that. The September statement arrived on a Tuesday morning while Margaret was having her coffee on the back step. She opened it at the kitchen table, still in her robe, reading glasses on, expecting nothing in particular. The total balance was $14,200. She set the statement down and picked it up again. She read through the charges slowly, the way she had once read through patient charts, looking for the thing that explained the number, the detail that would make it make sense. Restoration hardware, $3,800. Something called Luminary Wellness Retreat, $4,500. An interior design consultation. She didn't recognize the firm. $2,900. Various smaller charges she didn't recognize at all. The remainder. She sat with the statement for a long time. The coffee went cold. Then she called Daniel. He answered on the third ring, sounding distracted, and she could hear Vivian laughing about something in the background. A bright, uncomplicated sound, the laugh of someone having an easy afternoon. Daniel, she said, I need to talk to you about the credit card. Oh, yeah. A pause. The laugh in the background stopped. Sorry, I meant to mention that. We had some things come up. $14,000 worth of things. We're redoing the guest room, he said, turning it into a proper home studio for Vivian's brand work. It's been something she's needed for a while, and we found a designer we really liked, and it came together faster than expected. I should have told you. I know. Daniel, you should have asked me. I know. I'm sorry. But Mom, it's handled. I'll pay you back by the end of the month. November at the latest. She closed her eyes. Through the kitchen window, the garden was doing what it did in late September, pulling inward, conserving, preparing for the long, quiet months ahead. By November, she said. Absolutely. I promise. November came. The statement balance had grown, interest added to interest, the number acquiring a slow momentum of its own. Margaret called Daniel on the 15th. He apologized. Things were tight because of the holidays. Christmas shopping, Vivian's family coming from California, a work trip he hadn't anticipated. January, he said. Definitely January. January came. Nothing. She called again in late January. He apologized again. Genuinely, she thought. He sounded tired and somewhat diminished, the way people sound when they are ashamed of something they haven't fixed. February, he said. Things would be different in February. February came and went like January had. She opened the notebook in the kitchen drawer, the one with the tires and the mortgage and the Sedona conference, and added a new line. Credit card, $14,200. And beneath it, a column of zeros where the repayments should have been. The notebook was getting full. Year 7. 2024, the year she became furniture. It was the Christmas dinner that she returned to afterward when she tried to identify the moment that something in her finally shifted. Not broke, not yet, but shifted, like a foundation settling. She had cooked all day, turkey and gravy and roasted root vegetables and cranberry sauce made from scratch the way she had always made it, the whole house filling with the smell of it from mid-morning on. She had even made the apple pie. The first time in 3 years, she realized, standing at the counter rolling the crust. She had taken the recipe card out of the tin box and propped it against the backsplash and followed her grandmother's handwriting step by step. And there had been something almost ceremonial about it, something quietly necessary. 8 people around the table. Vivian's parents, who had flown up from Pasadena. 3 of Vivian's friends from her brand world. Women who all seemed to have the same precise, effortful casualness about them, the same practiced way of making everything look unconsidered. Daniel at the far end, pouring wine, laughing at something one of them had said. Margaret sat at the table and ate her dinner and listened to conversations she was not part of about people she did not know, and brands she had never heard of, and trips to places she would never go. No one asked her a single question about her life. Not one. She noticed this the way you notice a sound that has stopped, by its absence, by the shape of the space it left. She wasn't angry. She was something more unsettling than angry. She was invisible, present in body, accounted for in the head count, but not there in any way that mattered. Toward the end of the evening, when people were moving between the table and the living room and the kitchen in the loose, comfortable way of people who feel entirely at home, Vivian appeared beside her with an empty ice bucket. "Maggie, could you grab more ice from the freezer?" Margaret got the ice. She stood at the freezer for a moment longer than necessary, her hand resting on the door, the cold air reaching her face. Then she went to the sink to wash the dishes. She was still washing them, alone, the sounds of the party continuing in the other room, when she caught her reflection in the small mirror on the kitchen shelf, the one she had hung there 20 years ago because she liked having a mirror in unexpected places. She looked at the woman in the mirror for a long moment. She did not recognize her. Not her face. Her face was the same, older, marked by time in the ways she had made a kind of peace with. It was something else, something in the eyes, or behind them. The particular look of a person who has been slowly, quietly, without any single decisive moment, erased. She finished the dishes. She turned off the kitchen light. She went to bed before anyone noticed she had gone. April 2024, the Audi. She heard about the car, the way she heard about most things by then, indirectly, accidentally, in the gaps between the things people meant to say. She had stopped by their house on a Tuesday afternoon to drop off some jam she had made, strawberry, from the last of the summer fruit, sealed in the small mason jars she had been using for 30 years. Vivian answered the door in the particular state of relaxed readiness that Margaret had come to associate with her. Yoga clothes, hair artfully undone, the expression of someone who had just finished being productive and was pleased about it. "Dorothy, come in. You're just in time." "In time for what?" Vivian smiled, the kind of smile that contained information it was about to release slowly. "Daniel's planning something for my birthday. He won't tell me what, but I think it's big." Margaret set the jam on the counter. "Your birthday isn't until June." "I know. That's what makes it exciting. He's been planning ahead." She leaned in slightly, conspiratorial. "I think it's a car. There's an Audi Q7 I've had my eye on. Fully loaded. It's around $85,000, but..." She shrugged. The shrug of someone for whom $85,000 was an inconvenience rather than an impossibility. "Daniel says I deserve it." Margaret kept her face arranged into something appropriate. "How wonderful," she said. She drove home with both hands on the wheel and her mind doing arithmetic she didn't want it to do. That evening, Daniel called. She already knew what he was going to ask. "Mom," he said, "I wanted to ask you something." She waited. "It's about Vivian's birthday. I want to do something really special for her 40th. I was thinking, I know this is a lot to ask, but if you could help with the down payment, maybe $30,000, I can handle the financing for the rest. The notebook in the kitchen drawer, the column of zeros." "Daniel," she said quietly, "you still owe me over $14,000 from the credit card. You haven't paid back a cent." I know, but this is different. This is for her. It's her 40th birthday, Mom. I can't just... Get her something you can afford." "Mom, when does it stop, Daniel?" The line went very quiet. "You don't understand," he said finally, his voice dropping into something she recognized. The old defensive register, the one from his teenage years. Vivian is used to a certain kind of life. Her parents have money. Her friends have money. If I can't keep up, then maybe, Margaret said, and she heard her own voice as if from a slight distance, calm and clear and tired. She married the wrong person. The line went dead. Margaret sat in the kitchen for a long time after that. The notebook was in the drawer. The recipe tin was in the drawer. Robert's napkin was in the drawer. Outside, the April garden was waking up. The lavender beginning to gray-green, the sweet peas climbing the trellis, everything reaching toward something it couldn't see yet. She made her decision quietly, the way she had always made the decisions that mattered. She would not give him the money, and she would not tell him what she was going to do instead. She went to bed. For the first time in a long time, she slept well. The appointment with Dr. Harmon was routine. Margaret had been seeing him for 15 years, long enough that the checkups had taken on the comfortable rhythm of something between a medical visit and a conversation between two people who respected each other's time. He was in his late 50s, methodical and unhurried, with the particular quality of attention that good doctors develop over decades. The ability to look at a person and see not just the body, but the person inhabiting it. She sat on the paper-covered examination table in the small room that smelled of antiseptic and something faintly floral, a candle on the windowsill that seemed at odds with everything else in the room, and answered his questions in the order he asked them. Sleep, appetite, exercise, any new medications, any changes she had noticed. No, no, yes. None, nothing significant. He took her blood pressure twice, wrote something down. It's a little elevated, he said. Not alarming, but higher than your baseline. Have you been under any unusual stress? Margaret considered the question the way she had been considering questions for 7 years, carefully, from a slight distance, as though the honest answer were something that needed to be handled with protective equipment. Nothing unusual, she said. He looked up from his notes then, not at her chart, at her, Margaret. He set his pen down, a small gesture, but deliberate. How are you sleeping? And I don't mean the hours. I mean, are you resting? She opened her mouth to say fine. The word was right there, worn smooth from use, ready to be deployed. She had said it to Daniel and to Vivian and to neighbors who asked out of politeness and to herself in the bathroom mirror on mornings when she didn't quite believe it. Fine was the word that had gotten her through 7 years without having to stop and look at anything too directly. She opened her mouth, and the word didn't come. She sat on the paper-covered table with the antiseptic smell around her and the small incongruous candle on the windowsill, and she felt something give way inside her. Not dramatically, not with any of the violence she might have expected. Just a slow, quiet release. Like a window being opened in a room that had been closed for a very long time. No, she said. I don't think I am. Dr. Harmon nodded. He didn't seem surprised. He waited. And Margaret, who had not talked about any of it, not to Elaine, not to herself, not in any honest way, opened her mouth and found that once the first true word had come out, the rest followed with a kind of relief that frightened her a little. She didn't tell him everything. She told him enough. She told him about the years of lending money that never came back. She told him about the credit card. She told him about cooking Sunday dinners for dietary restrictions she had memorized, but that no one had ever thanked her for learning. She told him about the Christmas dinner and the ice bucket and the mirror in the kitchen. She told him about the green chair. She did not cry while she told him these things. She was aware that she probably should have, that in some version of this moment she would have been weeping, would have had the relief of weeping. But the tears didn't come. She felt instead a kind of hollow clarity, like a room after all the furniture has been moved out. Dr. Harmon listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "When was the last time someone asked you what you needed?" Margaret thought about it, really thought about it, going back through the years the way you go back through a house you've lived in for a long time, room by room. "I'm not sure," she said finally. "And when was the last time you told someone?" She didn't answer that one. The answer was too clear and too damaging to say out loud. "I think," Dr. Harmon said carefully, "that your blood pressure might be the least interesting thing happening in this room right now." She didn't go home after the appointment. She sat in her car in the parking lot for 10 minutes, keys in her hand, not ready to move. The sky outside was the particular gray of a Portland November. Not dramatic, not stormy, just steady and overcast and entirely committed to itself. She had always found that kind of sky oddly comforting. It didn't pretend. Then she drove to the park on the east bank of the river, the one where she used to bring Daniel on Saturday mornings when he was small. There was a stretch of path along the water where you could walk without thinking too hard, where the river did the thinking for you. She hadn't been there in years. She parked and walked to a bench near the water's edge and sat down. It was cold. She hadn't brought a scarf. The knitting was still unfinished in the basket by the bed, the same basket it had been sitting in for 2 years, waiting for her to come back to it. She sat with her hands in her coat pockets and looked at the river. And for the first time in 7 years, she let herself think without managing what she was thinking. When did I stop going to the garden in the mornings? She knew the answer, actually. It was the summer Daniel and Vivian had stayed with her, 2020. When Vivian's filming schedule meant the back door opening and closing at unpredictable times, the light changing, the sound of her voice carrying through the glass. Margaret had started taking her coffee upstairs instead. Just temporarily, she had told herself, just while they were here. They had left in September. She had not gone back to the back step in the mornings. She had not noticed this until right now, sitting on this bench, 4 years later. When did I stop reading in the evenings? The green chair had gone into storage in the spring of 2020. She had not replaced it with anything. She had been reading in bed, which was fine, which was perfectly fine, but the evenings had a different quality now. She fell asleep earlier, reading less, the books taking longer to finish, the small stack on the nightstand shifting slowly rather than turning over the way it used to. She had thought this was age. She was realizing now that it might have been something else. When did I start asking Daniel's permission for things? Not explicitly. Never explicitly. She would have caught that, would have refused it. It had happened in a more subtle way. She had started framing her own plans around their schedule, checking before she made commitments that had nothing to do with them, mentioning her plans to Daniel with an upward inflection. I was thinking of visiting Elaine this Thursday, as though it required his approval, as though her own time had become communal property without any formal agreement that this was so. She thought about the Thursday she had cut her coffee with Elaine short because Vivian had a call in the afternoon and liked the house quiet. She thought about Elaine's voice. Since when? When did I stop cooking what I wanted to cook? She thought about the recipe tin, her grandmother's index cards, the handwriting she had known since childhood, the apple pie she had not made for 3 years until Christmas, and at Christmas she had made it, and no one had eaten it, and she had wrapped the leftovers in foil and eaten a slice alone at the kitchen table the next morning and told herself she had made it for herself and almost believed it. When did I stop having opinions? This one stopped her. She sat with it on the bench by the river and felt it fully because it was the truest and most damaging of all of them. She had opinions. She had always had opinions about books and politics and how to grow tomatoes and what constituted a good life and what love actually required of a person and 100 other things. Robert had loved her opinions. He had married her, he used to say, partly because she always had a clear view on things and was not afraid to say so. At some point in the last 7 years, she had stopped saying so, not because anyone had told her to stop, not because she had been silenced in any way she could point to, but because she had learned, through accumulation, through the slow education of 100 small moments, that her opinions were not particularly welcome at the table, that the conversations she was invited into had predetermined shapes, and her role in them was primarily to agree or to listen, and that when she had occasionally deviated from this, when she had said carefully that she wasn't sure about something, that she saw it differently, the temperature in the room had changed in ways that were never acknowledged but always felt. And so she had stopped. She had stopped and told herself it was maturity, told herself it was choosing her battles, told herself it was what you did when you loved people. You made room for them. You didn't push. You kept the peace. But what had the peace cost? She looked at the river. The water moved with the patient indifference of something that had been moving long before she arrived and would continue long after. I didn't lose myself, she thought. I gave myself away, incrementally, voluntarily, one small adjustment at a time. And I called it love, and I called it maturity, and I called it keeping the peace, and I called it what mothers do. But it wasn't any of those things, or it wasn't only those things. It was fear. She sat with that word. Fear of what? She turned it over, looked underneath it. Fear of being difficult. Fear of being the kind of mother-in-law she had heard about. The intrusive kind, the one who couldn't let her son go, who made everything about herself. Fear of Daniel pulling away. Fear of losing the Sunday calls, the dinners, the small continuities that told her she was still necessary, still part of his life, still. And this was the one she hadn't let herself look at directly until now. Still loved. She had made herself smaller and smaller because she was afraid that if she took up her full space, there wouldn't be room for her in their lives at all. And in doing so, she had made it come true anyway. She had disappeared herself so thoroughly that at her own son's Christmas dinner, the only thing anyone had thought to ask her was to get more ice. She was not angry at Daniel. She was not angry at Vivian. She was something more complicated than angry. something that had grief in it and clarity in it and a long, exhausted recognition that the person she had been making herself smaller for had not even noticed it was happening. And neither had I, she thought. Until now. She called Elaine from the bench. The phone rang twice. Elaine picked up with the alertness of someone who had been half expecting a call. "Maggie, are you busy?" "No." A pause. "Are you all right?" Margaret looked at the river. A heron had landed on a rock near the far bank, gray and still and entirely composed, as though standing in cold water in November were simply what one did. "I don't think I've been all right for a while," she said. "I think I've been disappearing and I didn't notice." Elaine was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone who didn't know what to say, the silence of someone who had been waiting a long time to be allowed to say what they knew. "I know," she said finally. "I've been watching it happen." "Why didn't you say something?" I tried. "A few times." A pause. "You weren't ready to hear it." Margaret thought about the Thursday at groundwork. Since when? She thought about all the other small moments when Elaine had said something careful and true, and Margaret had changed the subject. "What did you see?" she asked. "From the outside. What did it look like?" Elaine took a breath. "It looked like you shrinking," she said. "Every time I saw you, and I know this sounds harsh, Maggie, but I need you to hear it. You were a little bit less, not less capable, less present, like you were always listening for a cue from someone else before you spoke, like you'd stopped trusting your own read on things. I noticed the coffee first, actually." Her voice was gentle. "You used to have strong opinions about coffee. You used to lecture me about the salt thing. Then one day you showed up to groundwork and ordered oat milk in your latte, and when I looked at you, you said Vivian had gotten you into it. And I thought, Margaret doesn't even like oat milk. She's told me she doesn't like oat milk, but she ordered it like she'd forgotten that." Margaret sat very still. "It wasn't about the coffee," Elaine continued. "I know that, but it was the coffee that made me see it clearly. You were changing yourself around the edges and not noticing." "I thought I was being adaptable," Margaret said. "I thought I was being kind." "I know." Elaine's voice was soft now, the way it got when she was saying something that mattered. "You've always been too kind for your own good, Maggie. That's not a criticism. It's just kindness that only runs in one direction isn't kindness anymore. It's just loss." Margaret closed her eyes. The heron on the rock across the river hadn't moved. "I've missed you," Elaine said quietly. "The real you, the one with the opinions and the garden and the salt in the coffee. I've missed her for a long time." "She's been here," Margaret said. Then, more honestly, "I think she's been waiting." "I know she has," Elaine said. "I've been waiting too." Margaret sat on the bench for a long time after she hung up. The cold had worked its way through her coat. The heron eventually lifted from the rock and flew upriver without any apparent hurry, its wings making the slow, deliberate movements of something that had learned not to waste effort. She thought about the notebook in the kitchen drawer, the numbers on the page. She thought about the green chair in the storage room. She thought about the knitting basket by the bed, the unfinished scarf, the needles still holding the last row she had knitted 2 years ago. She thought about this recipe tin and her grandmother's handwriting, and the apple pie that no one had eaten at Christmas, and the slice she had eaten alone at the kitchen table the next morning, and the way it had tasted. Good, genuinely good, exactly as it was supposed to taste. And the fact that she had eaten it in a hurry, standing up, before anyone else came downstairs. When did I start eating standing up in my own kitchen? She stood up from the bench. Her knees ached from the cold. She walked back to the car slowly, hands in her pockets, breathing the November air that smelled of river and rain and the particular cold earth smell of a city in late autumn. She sat in the driver's seat and did not start the engine immediately. She thought about what she was going to do. Not with anger. She was surprised to find she wasn't angry. Not really. Not in the hot and righteous way she might have expected. She was something calmer and more resolved than angry. She was clear. For the first time in 7 years, she was clear. She started the engine. She knew exactly what she needed to do. She did not go to the bank the next morning. She went to the storage room. It took her a moment to find the light switch. She rarely came in here, had not come in here deliberately in months. And when the light came on, she stood in the doorway and looked at the accumulated evidence of the last several years. Boxes of things that had been moved to make room for other things. A folding table Vivian had asked her to store temporarily 2 years ago that was still here. A set of curtains Margaret had taken down when Vivian said the pattern was busy and that neutral tones would make the living room feel more spacious. And in the far corner, half covered by a moving blanket someone had folded over it without particular care, the green wingback chair. Margaret crossed the room and lifted the blanket off. The chair was exactly as she had left it. Or rather, exactly as it had been when it had been put here without her permission. The fabric was dusty. One of the back feet had caught on something at some point and left a small scuff on the baseboard. But it was intact. It was entirely itself, waiting in the way that solid, well-made things wait. Without complaint, without urgency, simply present. She stood looking at it for a moment. Then she picked it up. It was heavier than she remembered. Or perhaps she was more tired than she used to be. Or perhaps both. And carried it back down the hallway and into the living room and set it in the corner where the afternoon light came in at an angle that made everything look slightly golden. She stood back and looked at it. It looked right. It looked the way things look when they are in the place they belong. She went and made coffee, 2 heaping spoons, a small pinch of salt, no sugar, and brought it to the chair and sat down in it and drank it slowly in the afternoon light. Nobody asked her to move it. Nobody was there to ask. That evening she found the knitting basket. It was beside the bed where she had left it, the unfinished scarf still on the needles, the yarn slightly dusty from 2 years of sitting. She picked it up and examined the last row she had knitted. Even tension, no dropped stitches, exactly where she had left off as though no time had passed. She sat in the green chair. She had carried it to the bedroom. She decided she would keep it wherever she wanted it. That was the point. And she knit 3 rows before her hands remembered what they were doing, and the rhythm came back. And then she kept going, the needles clicking quietly in the still room, the scarf growing by millimeters in the lamplight. She knit until 10 o'clock. When she set it down, she felt something she recognized from a long time ago. The particular satisfaction of having made something with her hands, of having taken raw material and turned it into a thing that had not existed before. It was a small feeling. It was an enormous feeling. She slept better than she had in months. In the morning, she went to the garden. It was November. Nothing was growing. The beds were put to sleep for the winter, the lavender cut back and the tomato cages stacked against the fence. But the rosemary was there, as it always was in November, stubborn and fragrant and more alive in the cold than anything had a right to be. She sat on the back step with her coffee. The morning was gray and quiet and cold enough that she could see her breath. She wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at the garden and did nothing else for 15 minutes. Did not think about Daniel. Did not think about the credit card statement. Did not rehearse conversations or plan logistics or manage anything at all. She just sat. A bird landed on the tomato cage and looked at her with the frank, assessing gaze of birds, and then flew away. She finished her coffee. She went inside and got dressed and called Elaine. "I'm coming to groundwork," she said, the usual time, "and I'm ordering my coffee the way I like it." Elaine laughed, a real laugh, warm and immediate. "I'll be there." At groundwork, Margaret ordered a drip coffee, black, with a cup of hot water on the side. The young man behind the counter looked at her with mild curiosity. She explained about the salt. A very small amount, it sounds strange. It was her mother's method. It takes the bitterness out without adding sweetness. He seemed genuinely interested. He said he'd try it himself. She carried her coffee to the corner table where Elaine was already sitting with her hands wrapped around a large mug and Gerald's cat hair, as always, on her sleeve. They talked for 2 hours. Not about Daniel, not about Vivian, not about money or credit cards or the architecture of how Margaret had arrived at this point. They talked about Elaine's retirement, about a trip she was planning to see her sister in New Mexico, about a book Margaret had just finished that she had strong opinions about and did not hesitate to share. They talked about a film they had both seen years ago that they disagreed about and argued about pleasurably for 20 minutes. They talked about Robert. They didn't often talk about Robert, and Margaret was surprised to find it felt good, felt like something returned rather than something lost. She did not check the time. She did not think about whether she needed to get back for anything. She stayed until they were ready to leave, and then they stood on the sidewalk in the November cold for another 20 minutes because neither of them was quite ready to stop. "You seem different," Elaine said when they finally said goodbye. "I feel different," Margaret said. Good different? Margaret thought about the chair in the bedroom, the knitting, the back step that morning, the cold, the bird, the 15 minutes of nothing. "Yes," she said. Good different. She went to the bank on a Tuesday. She had made the appointment the previous Friday, and in the days between making it and keeping it, she had not changed her mind, had not wavered, had not talked herself into or out of anything, had simply let the decision sit in her chest where it felt steady and correct. The advisor was a woman in her 40s named Carol, competent and professional and entirely without judgment, who walked Margaret through the process with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Margaret explained what she wanted to do. Carol nodded and typed and occasionally asked clarifying questions. There was no drama in it. There was no ceremony. She closed the joint savings account, $63,000, moved to a new account under her name only. She called the credit card company and had Daniel removed as an authorized user. She blocked the card. She signed the paperwork. Carol slid the copies across the desk and Margaret folded them and put them in her purse and stood up and shook Carol's hand. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" Carol asked. Margaret thought about it. "Actually," she said, "yes. I'd like to speak with someone about financial planning. For myself. For my own future." Carol smiled, a small, genuine smile that Margaret found unexpectedly moving. "Of course. Let me get someone." She sat back down. She did not call Daniel that day. She went home and made dinner. Roast chicken the way she liked it, with roasted garlic and thyme, the good olive oil she usually saved for company, and ate it at the kitchen table with a glass of red wine and the book she was currently in the middle of, propped open against the salt cellar. She did not turn on the television. She did not check her phone more than once. She ate her dinner slowly, reading between bites, and when she was finished, she washed her one plate and her one glass and dried them and put them away, and the kitchen was quiet and orderly and entirely hers. 3 days later, Daniel called. She had been expecting it. She was in the garden. She had been going to the garden every morning now, had not missed a single morning since the day she had brought the chair back from the storage room, as though the two things were connected, which perhaps they were. And she sat on the back step with her second cup of coffee and answered. "Mom." His voice was strange, compressed somehow, the voice of someone who had been breathing carefully for several days. "Something's wrong with the savings account. I tried to make a transfer and it said the account was closed." "It is," she said. Silence. "What?" "I closed it. Last Tuesday." Another silence, longer this time, with a different quality. She could hear him processing, could almost hear the moment when he understood that this was not an error, not a bank issue, not something that could be fixed with a phone call. "You closed it," he said. Not a question. "Why?" "Because it's my money, Daniel. It was always my money." "Mom, I know you needed it for the down payment." She kept her voice even, not cold, not angry, simply clear. "I know the dealership is expecting you. I know you told Vivian it was handled. And I'm sorry that this is going to be difficult. I genuinely am. But I am not going to give you $30,000 for a car you cannot afford, as a gesture toward a marriage that is costing you things you don't have." He was breathing hard now. She could hear it. "You don't understand," he said. "If I don't get her this, she's been counting on it. I promised her. You promised her with money that isn't yours. Mom, this is her 40th birthday. Daniel." She said his name the way she had said it when he was 14, and she needed him to stop and hear her. "Listen to me. I love you. I have always loved you. And because I love you, I am going to tell you the truth, which is that I should have said this years ago, and I'm sorry I didn't." She paused. The garden was very still. The rosemary moved slightly in the November air. "You have been borrowing against your future for 6 years to maintain a life you cannot sustain. You have been asking me to fund the gap between what you have and what you think you need to be. And I have let you, because I was afraid of what saying no would mean. For us, for our relationship, for the version of myself that needed to be needed. That was my failure, and I own it. But it stops here. Not because I'm punishing you, because I love you too much to keep helping you disappear." The line was quiet for a long time. "She's going to be devastated," he said finally. His voice had changed. The defensiveness had gone out of it, replaced by something more honest and more frightened. "She's going to think I lied to her." "Did you?" A pause. "Yes," he said quietly. "I suppose I did. Then that's the conversation you need to have with her, and it's going to be hard. And I can't have it for you." She softened her voice slightly. "But Daniel, I think you already know that something is wrong. I think you've known for a while. And I think part of you called me today, hoping I would say no." Another long silence. "Maybe," he said. So quiet she almost didn't catch it. "Maybe." "Mom," he said after a moment, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Were you happy? Growing up, I mean. Was it enough? The way we lived?" She hadn't expected the question. She sat with it. "Yes," she said. "We didn't have a great deal, but what we had was real. Your father and I, we didn't spend money we didn't have trying to be something we weren't. And when he died and it was just the two of us, I worked hard and we had enough, and it was ours. All of it was ours. That mattered to me, that it was real." "I've never felt like anything was real," Daniel said. "Not in a long time." The words landed quietly. Margaret closed her eyes. "I know," she said. "I think that's what I've been watching happen." He came over that evening. He looked the way people look when they have been through something that has rearranged them. Not broken, not destroyed, but changed in a way that hadn't finished settling yet. He sat at the kitchen table and Margaret made tea and they talked for a long time. Not about money, not about the dealership or Vivian's birthday, or the credit card balance, but about the things underneath all of that. About his father. About what it had been like to watch Margaret work 2 jobs and never complain. About the pressure he had felt, somewhere along the way, to be more than what he was. To have more, to show more, to present a version of his life that matched some standard he had absorbed without examining where it came from. "I think I've been performing," he said. "For years. I've been performing a life I thought I was supposed to want. And Vivian?" He was quiet for a moment. "She wants what she wants." "I don't think she's been performing. I think she genuinely wants those things. And I thought, if I could give them to her, she'd be happy. And if she was happy, things would be okay." "And were they?" He looked at his tea. "No, they kept moving. Every time I got close to whatever the next thing was, there was a next thing after that." He looked up. "I don't think it was ever going to be enough, Mom. I think I knew that. I just didn't want to." Margaret nodded. She did not say "I told you so." It wasn't that kind of moment. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know yet." He said it honestly, without deflection. "I think I need to talk to her. Really talk to her. Not about the car, about everything. About what we actually have and what we actually want and whether those things can go together." "That sounds right. And Mom..." He looked at her directly, for the first time that evening. "I'm sorry. For the credit card. For all of it. I know sorry doesn't fix the numbers." "No," she said. "It doesn't. I want to pay you back. I know it'll take time, but I mean it." She looked at her son across her kitchen table. 41 years old, tired, sitting in the chair where he had sat as a boy doing homework while she cooked dinner, in the kitchen that smelled of roast chicken and thyme, and the particular smell of a house that had been lived in for a long time by people who had loved each other imperfectly and genuinely, and without stopping. "I believe you," she said, and she did. Later, after Daniel had gone, he had an hour's drive home and she had made him take the rest of the roast chicken, wrapped in foil the way she always had. Margaret sat in the green chair with the last of her tea and the book she had been reading, and she thought about the day. She had done what she set out to do. She had said the things she had been not saying for 7 years. She had not raised her voice. She had not issued ultimatums or made threats or weaponized her grief. She had simply told the truth, in her own kitchen, to her own son, in the voice she used when she meant something completely. She opened her book to page 94. She read until her eyes got heavy. She fell asleep in the chair with the lamp on and the book open on her chest, the way she used to fall asleep years ago, before the chair had been moved and the evenings had changed, and she had stopped being the person who fell asleep reading in the lamplight. It felt like coming home to a place she had almost forgotten existed. 3 months passed. Not quietly. Nothing passes quietly when the thing that has been held together by avoidance finally comes apart. There were difficult weeks. There were phone calls Margaret didn't have all the answers for, and silences between her and Daniel that were longer than she would have liked, and a period in January when she wasn't sure what the shape of things would be when they settled. But they settled. Not the way she might have hoped. Not entirely. Not in all the ways. But in the ways that mattered. Vivian moved out in December. Daniel told her over the phone. Not dramatically, not with the kind of detail that required Margaret to perform a particular reaction. He said it simply, the way he had been saying things recently, without the careful neutrality that used to mean something was being managed. She left, Mom. She said she needed someone who could match where she was going. Margaret was quiet for a moment. How are you? She asked. Honestly? A pause. Relieved. Which makes me feel terrible. It doesn't have to. I loved her. I know you did. But I think I loved who I thought she was. Or who I thought I could be with her. He exhaled. I don't think those are the same thing. No, Margaret said. They're not. He sold the house in January. Too big, he said. Too expensive. Too full of a version of his life he had been performing for 6 years. He found a small rental in a neighborhood Margaret knew. She had driven through it for years on her way to the hospital. Old houses with front porches and mature trees, and the particular comfortable shabbiness of places that had been lived in by real people for a long time. He called her from the new apartment on the first Saturday after he moved in, sounding lighter than she had heard him sound in years. It's small, he said, like genuinely small. My couch is 6 inches from the television. Do you like it? A pause. The pause of someone genuinely checking, actually consulting themselves rather than producing a prepared answer. Yeah, he said. I actually do. He had been paying her back in installments since February. Not large amounts, $200 a month, transferred on the first, without fail. It would take years at this rate. She didn't mind the years. The consistency was what mattered, the small, regular proof that something had changed in a way that held. He had also, in a gesture that Margaret found unexpectedly moving, started calling on Sunday evenings again. Not always long calls, sometimes just 10 minutes, but consistent, without fail, the way it used to be, before Vivian, before the slow erosion, before everything. She picked up every time. He came over on a Saturday in February. Margaret had been in the garden, winter pruning, the lavender cut back hard the way it needed to be cut back hard to come in full in the spring, and she heard his car in the driveway and came around the side of the house with her gloves still on and dirt on her knees. He was standing on the front step holding something, a tin box, small, blue-green with age, the lid slightly dented on one corner. Her grandmother's recipe tin. She stopped walking. I found it, he said, when I was packing up the house. It was in one of the kitchen drawers. I think it got mixed in with some of our stuff when we moved. He held it out, slightly awkward, the way he held things when he wasn't sure of his reception. Vivian was going to donate it. I grabbed it before she could. Margaret pulled off her garden gloves and took the tin from him. She opened it. Her grandmother's index cards, her grandmother's handwriting, faded but legible, the particular loops and slants she had known since she was a child, the apple pie recipe on top, where it had always been. She stood on the front path in her dirty garden clothes holding the recipe tin and felt something move through her that was too large and too quiet to have a clean name. Thank you, she said. Her voice was steady. Mom, he stopped, started again. I know I can't fix the years. I know that. But, he looked at the tin in her hands. Could you teach me? The apple pie. I've been thinking about it. I think I always took it for granted that you'd just keep making it, and I never actually learned how. Margaret looked at her son. He was 41 years old, and he was standing on her front path in February with his hands in his coat pockets, asking to learn how to make his great-grandmother's apple pie. And he meant it. She could see that he meant it completely. Come inside, she said. I'll put the kettle on. They spent the afternoon in the kitchen. Margaret propped the index card against the backsplash, the familiar dented card, her grandmother's handwriting, and they worked through it together. Daniel peeled apples with the focused, slightly clumsy effort of someone learning a new physical skill, concentrating harder than the task required, occasionally asking questions that revealed how little he had ever paid attention to this kind of thing, and how much he wanted to now. Why do you add the lemon juice? It keeps the apples from browning, and it balances the sweetness. Why the cinnamon last? My grandmother said if you add it too early, it gets lost. You want it to stay distinct. He nodded seriously. He was treating the information with a care that made her want to laugh and also made her want to cry, and she did neither, just kept showing him and answering his questions and letting the afternoon do what it was doing. The kitchen filled with the smell of it, butter and apples and cinnamon and the particular warmth of a winter oven in a house that had been a home for 30 years. At some point, Daniel said, without looking up from the crust he was attempting to crimp, "I'm sorry, Mom, for all of it. I know I've said that, but I want to keep saying it until it sounds like what I mean." "I know what you mean," Margaret said. "I think I forgot, for a long time, what was real." He looked up then. "You were always real. This was always real, and I treated it like it would always be there no matter what I did." "It is still here," she said. "That's the thing about real things. They're harder to destroy than we think." He nodded, looked back at the crust. "The crimping isn't right," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's not. Watch." She showed him again, her fingers pressing the edge of the pastry into the familiar pattern she had made 10,000 times, the pattern her grandmother had made and her mother had made, and that she had made alone in this kitchen for years. He tried again. It was better. Not perfect, but better. The pie went into the oven at 4 o'clock. While it baked, they sat in the living room. Daniel on the couch, Margaret in the green wingback chair, the lamp on against the February dark coming in early through the windows. They talked about nothing important and everything important, the way conversations go when the people having them have finally stopped managing each other. Margaret picked up her knitting, the scarf, finished now, soft and warm in the colors she had chosen years ago and still liked. She worked a few rows while they talked, the needles clicking quietly in the lamplight. At some point Daniel noticed, "Is that new?" "No," she said. "I finished it recently. Started it a long time ago." He looked at it for a moment. "It's nice. Thank you." Outside, the February garden was doing what February gardens do, waiting, conserving, holding everything it needed for spring in the cold dark of the soil. The lavender cut back hard. The sweet pea seeds she had planted last week already doing whatever seeds do underground before anyone can see it. The kitchen smelled of apples and cinnamon and butter. The lamp made the corner golden. The chair felt exactly right. After Daniel left, he had stayed for dinner, had eaten 2 slices of pie and declared the crimping not my best work, and she had told him it was categorically not. And they had both laughed, really laughed, the kind that comes from somewhere genuine. Margaret washed the dishes alone. Not the way she had washed dishes at Christmas, invisible, the party continuing without her in the other room. Just washing dishes, in her own kitchen, at the end of an ordinary Saturday, the radio on low, the last of the daylight gone and the kitchen warm and lit and entirely hers. She dried the pie tin, her grandmother's pie tin, retrieved from the tin box, used for the first time in years, and set it on the shelf where it had always lived. She turned off the kitchen light. She carried a cup of tea to the green chair. She picked up her book, page 94, where she had left off months ago, the night everything had shifted, and she read. Outside, somewhere in the dark garden, the rosemary was doing what it always did in winter, holding on, staying fragrant, waiting for no one. She read until her eyes got heavy. She did not think about the money. She did not think about Vivian. She did not think about the 7 years or what they had cost or what she might have done differently. She thought about the pie. She thought about her grandmother's handwriting on the index card. She thought about Daniel's hands learning the shape of the crust. She thought, this is what was always here. This is what was always real. She fell asleep in the chair with the lamp on. "I want to say something to you before I go. Not advice. I don't think I'm in any position to give advice. What I went through was mine, and what you're going through is yours, and the details are never the same twice. But I think there might be someone watching this at 11 o'clock at night, or 2 in the morning, sitting somewhere quiet in a house that doesn't quite feel like it belongs to them anymore, and I want to speak to that person directly. You did not lose yourself all at once. That's the thing nobody tells you. It doesn't happen in a single moment that you can point to and say, there, that was when it changed. It happens in increments so small that each one seems entirely reasonable. One adjusted meal, one rescheduled coffee, one opinion you kept to yourself because the moment didn't seem right. One morning you took your coffee upstairs instead of to the garden because it was easier. And then one day you're standing in a kitchen mirror at Christmas, and you don't recognize the person looking back at you. And the frightening part, the part I couldn't say out loud for a long time, is that you don't know when it happened. You can't find the beginning, which means you can't find the thing to undo. But here is what I learned, sitting on a bench by a river in November with my hands in my pockets. You don't have to find the beginning to find your way back. You just start. wherever you are, with something small and real and entirely yours. For me, it was a chair, a green wingback chair that I carried out of a storage room and put back where it belonged. It sounds small because it was small, and it was also the most important thing I did, because once I put the chair back, I sat in it. And once I sat in it, I remembered what it felt like to be in a room on my own terms. And once I remembered that, the rest started to follow. Not quickly, not without difficulty, not without the months of hard conversations and uncomfortable silences and grief for the years that had been what they had been. But it followed. I am 66 years old. I have a garden that gets too much rain and not enough sun. I have a green chair in the corner of my living room where the afternoon light comes in at an angle that makes everything look slightly golden. I have a friend named Elaine who tells me the truth before I ask for it. I have a son who is learning, slowly and imperfectly and genuinely, how to be honest about what he has and what he wants and what he can give. And I have a recipe tin with my grandmother's handwriting inside it, sitting on the shelf in my kitchen where it has always belonged. I don't know exactly when I came back to myself, but one morning I woke up and went to the garden with my coffee and sat on the back step in the cold, and the coffee tasted right, exactly right, the way it had always tasted before everything got complicated. And I knew I was back, and this time I intended to stay.
Welcome back. How much does it cost to keep the peace? For Margaret, the price was $18,000. A credit card maxed out by a son she adored, and a daughter-in-law who saw her as furniture. We're often told that being a good mother means endless sacrifice, but what happens when there's nothing left to give? After years of being a soft place to land for people who never asked how she was doing, Margaret decided to say one simple, devastating word: no. This isn't just a story about money, it's a story about the high cost of silence and the power of finally standing your ground. Stay until the end for a revelation that changed Margaret's life forever. If you find value in this story, please like and subscribe.